Good morning to my respected lecturer, Dr. Siti Shohaida, and everyone present today. My name is Umairah Binti Mohd Fazli, and today I'm honoured to present my thesis proposal for individual assignment 2 entitled Gender Differences in Lower Secondary Students' Perception of TikTok for Self-Regulated Learning in English Pronunciation. To guide our session today, my presentation will follow 3-chapter structure, where I will begin Chapter 1, Introduction, Chapter 2, Literature Review, and Chapter 3, Methodology, and lastly, a short conclusion. Now let us begin with Chapter 1, Introduction. Accurate English pronunciation is one of the most essential components of language learning because it forms the very foundation of oral communicative competence. Under our current SBERC curriculum and international CFR guidelines, secondary students are expected to speak clearly. Those who struggle with pronunciation often face high speaking anxiety and distant lack of oral motivation. Although Malaysia has pushed its ESL curriculum towards interactive communication, real-world classrooms remain heavily exam-oriented where traditional repetition and mechanical drills dominate. This environment places intense pressure on learners, creating a strong fear of peer judgment and public embarrassment, which ultimately discourages students from speaking English altogether. So, to address this issue, modern digital learning utilizes short-form videos production to bridge daily social media habits with language practice. Platforms like TikTok offer a flexible, low-anxiety space where students can safely make errors and try again through private self-recordings. Therefore, these studies explore lower secondary ESL students' perception and specifically highlights gender-based differences in using TikTok as self-regulated tool for pronunciation learning. This brings us directly to the core problem statement of my study, which is divided into 3 critical layers. First, the practical issues. Despite the modern ESL curriculums emphasize on communicative skills, lower secondary students experience high speaking anxiety and low motivation when using oral English. In Malaysia, classroom remain heavily teacher-centered and exam-oriented, prioritizing grammar and memorization. Hence, students have very little chance to engage in interactive speaking. Driven by the intense fear of making pronunciation mistakes or facing negative peer judgment, students become passive participants, completely lacking the desire to improve. Next, the limitation of the conventional classroom. Current teaching practice heavily overlook the actual process of learning to speak. Instead, they rely on textbook work and repetitive drilling. This traditional method forces students to immediate public assessment, which drastically spikes their anxiety due to fear of criticism from teachers and peers. While technology offers a flexible alternative where students can attempt tasks multiple times safely, we face an academic weaknesses. Thus, without exploring how students perceive the academic usefulness of platforms like TikTok, mobile learning remains a mere form of entertainment. Thus, this addresses the empirical research gap, as although TikTok offers an active alternative language learning environment, there is a notable lack of local studies on its use for self-regulated pronunciation learning. Furthermore, how gender differences shape these perceptions remain completely unexplored, making this study aims to bridge this specific empirical gap. Thus, to address these gaps, this study has 2 research objectives. 1. To investigate lower secondary students' perception of TikTok as a self-regulated learning tool for English pronunciation, focusing on its role as a low-anxiety space for autonomous practice beyond the classroom. 2. To examine whether these perceptions differ by gender, identifying possible differences in how male and female students engage with short-form video features to inform more inclusive digital learning strategies. For this study may help 3 main groups. First, for students, it shows how they can use everyday apps like TikTok not just for scrolling but for practicing English pronunciation in a fun and stress-free way. Second, for ESS teachers, it may help by providing useful ideas on how to design pronunciation activities that match different needs and interests, including differences between boys and girls. Lastly, for school administrators, this research may help them make better decisions about using technology in schools and improving digital learning in the classroom. Moving on to Chapter 2, my literature review explores self-regulated learning in digital environments through the lens of Zimmerman's SRL theory and Cauchy's effective filter hypothesis. The literature established that SRL is not an innate trait, but rather a dynamic adaptive ability driven by students' motivation. In language acquisition, independent pronunciation practice fits perfectly into Zimmerman's cyclic model of planning, performance, monitoring, and reflective evaluation. With the rise of mobile learning, social media platform provides students with rich, authentic micro-learning content outside the classroom. However, we face what researchers call social media paradox. Because these digital spaces are unobstructed, they carry a high risk of digital distraction. Therefore, the actual educational success depends heavily on the student's internal capability to self-regulate. When used effectively, TikTok's interactive features such as duets, lip sync, and voiceovers act as a vital scaffolding mechanism by lowering the student's affective filter. These features successfully shift students from passive listening to active language production, which directly helps minimize their speech anxiety and build oral confidence. This brings us to the core gaps of my research aim to fill. First, there is a clear institutional gap, as most existing studies on TikTok and SRL focus on higher education, leaving lower secondary learners largely underexplored. Second, although literature suggests that gender-influenced metacognitive strategies, there is still a lack of empirical evidence on gender differences in SRL with being shown from video platforms, particularly in the Malaysian ESL context. This study aims to address these identified empirical gaps. Moving on to Chapter 3, this study adopts an embedded method research designed to obtain a comprehensive understanding of lower secondary ESL students' perceptions of TikTok for pronunciation. This design is suitable as it embeds a qualitative component within a quantitative framework, allowing numerical findings to be supported by in-depth descriptive insights. This study will be conducted in Penang, targeting lower secondary students from Form 1 to Form 3. Data collection will be completed within 4 weeks, ensuring an efficient yet comprehensive process for both survey and interview phases. To ensure validity and relevance, the questionnaire and interview items were adapted from established sources to fit short-form video, media, and self-regulated pronunciation learning. For the primary phase, convenience sampling will be used with 2 classes completing the printed questionnaire, while purpose sample will be selected a gender-balanced subsample of 4 to 6 students for some semi-structured interviews to obtain rich data on gender differences. Next, I will discuss the data collection and analysis procedures, which is split into 2 distinct phases. Phase 1 addresses research question 1 and 2 by conducting printed surveys directly in the classroom. This quantitative data will be analyzed using descriptive statistics, specifically means to find the overall trends and standard deviation to look at the spread of the responses. Additionally, I will run an independent sample t-test to statistically investigate whether there are significant differences between male and female students' perceptions. Following this, Phase 2 will be address our qualitative layer. I will select a purposeful subsample of 4 to 6 participants from the initial survey group to participate in the semi-structured interviews. This interview will be transcribed and analyzed using inductive thematic analysis. This helps identify common themes and deeper patterns that explain and explore the statistical findings. Finally, the research ethics and the expected contribution. In terms of ethics, formal permission will be obtained from school authorities before beginning the study. Students will be briefed that participation is 100% voluntary and their confidentiality is completely guaranteed. Thus, written student consent will also be mandatory before starting any interviews. As for the expected contribution, since this is an undergrad study, the goals are highly practical as it aims to provide baseline insight into how early secondary learners manage independent pronunciation practice via TikTok, and it contributes a foundational perspective on how gender influence these autonomous digital learning strategies. In conclusion, this study explores lower secondary ESL students' perception of TikTok as a self-regulated learning tool for English pronunciation in Penang. Using an embedded mixed method designed with printed surveys and semi-structured interviews, it aims to examine students' experience and gender-specific differences. The findings are expected to provide empirical data to support inclusive, student-centered digital learning strategies in the Malaysia ESL context. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention, Dr. Siti Shahida.